On this week's edition of New York Now, Governor Cuomo's got a new book and we've got a preview. Bernadette Hogan from the New York Post joins us with details. Then, Democrats are trying to win big in this year's elections. State Democratic Chair Jay Jacobs joins me with analysis. Later, the state's restaurants are now entering their 8th month of COVID-19 restrictions, and things aren't looking good. Leaders from the restaurant industry share their perspective. Plus, we'll introduce you to Michelle Hinchy, a Democrat who's running in one of the state's most closely watched races. I'm Dan Clark, and this is New York Now.
Today, the Senate majority will pass legislation.
We will pass a law prohibiting it, and we will take them to court challenging it.
Taking yet another stand for New York and sending a message to the nation.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Dan Clark. This was the week that we've been waiting for since August. Finally, after months of suspense, Governor Andrew Cuomo's new book was released this week. And usually when a politician puts out a new book, it means they want to get something out of it. For Andrew Cuomo, the book has stoked new rumors that he might want to take a more national role. And this week, some rumors circulated that he might be on Joe Biden's shortlist for AG. But sorry, Cuomo fans, he said this week that he's just not interested.
I have no interest in going into Washington. I said when this COVID situation started, just so I had total credibility with the people of the state, I'm not running for president. I'm not running for vice president. I don't want to go to Washington. I just am giving you the straight advice as your governor, and that's where I am.
But let's get more into the book with Bernadette Hogan from the New York Post. Bernadette, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we have the book.
Yes.
We've waited a few months for it. It's here. It's more than 200 pages. I read it in like 4 hours. It was quite the journey. What stuck out to you?
Right. So I also read it. It took me a little longer, and it actually really taxed my eyes. But it was interesting because, of course, we lived the past 6 months covering the governor, his daily press conferences, which ended the day-to-day in June. But what stuck out to me was, you know, a lot of the jargon was very familiar, but he had a lot of references to his father, the late Mario Cuomo. And I thought that was very interesting, how his father really is still with him all the time.
All the time.
All the time. And but Mario's name also competed with reference of President Trump, which was probably on every other page as well.
Yeah. To me, the whole book was a juxtaposition between this is what the state did during the coronavirus, and this is what the federal government did not do during the coronavirus. That seemed to be the overall theme.
Right.
But the stuff about his father was just so surreal at some points. There was one part where he talks about when he's feeling a little sentimental.
Yeah.
He literally wears his father's shoes.
Right.
Which just seemed so strange to me, but also kind of sweet.
Yeah, and I think also because and this is a theme throughout, you know, the governor's past 3 terms and, you know, the term we're in, his father is his role model, and so he's always comparing him. So it's an interesting psychological study there. But also, you know, there's other references with his daughters. He had these 3 daughters with him throughout the majority of the pandemic, so he got some family time with them. But a lot of what the governor is describing is how he was communicating a message to New Yorkers, and that message that was then, you know, it was told to the press, and then we of course wrote, but how he was trying to assuage fears and communicate that everything was okay, et cetera, which I thought was interesting because, I mean, personally, you know, we've been reporting on this for months, but he was talking about how he was trying to get a message out, which, you know, just the explanation of that thought process was, I think, really hammered home.
He also talked about how he was trying to get the message out and message received from local officials, including the mayor. What does he say about the mayor in the book? I read a little bit about it, and I like the part where he writes that he was not the mayor's biggest fan, or the other way around, one of the two, which usually he kind of punts on that question.
Right. Well, I mean, the tension between the governor and the mayor of New York City is omnipresent, I mean, throughout several administrations. But the governor references specific incidents when back in the early, or the late spring, early summer, when the George Floyd protests were very prominent nationally, but also in New York City, and the governor was contemplating, you know, and he says it in the book, he says, do I displace the mayor or bring in the National Guard, because the NYPD could not handle the protests and the tensions and the lootings, et cetera. And then the governor, of course, you know, he says things like, at one point, Trump complimented Mayor de Blasio, and Cuomo says, that's the most ludicrous thing, or I'm paraphrasing, that's the most ludicrous thing. Mayor de Blasio is the antithesis of Trump, so that was funny. But it was interesting. There's several passing references of the governor and the mayor's tensions.
There's a lot going on in this book. There's just too much for us to go over in the short time that we have. So we'll leave it there. The book is out now for anybody that wants to buy it. Bernadette Hogan from the New York Post, thank you so much as always.
Thank you.
This year's elections could be huge for Democrats in New York. They already won a majority in the state Senate 2 years ago, but they could take enough seats this year for a veto-proof supermajority. And they also have their eye on a few seats in Congress held by Republicans. But for all of that to happen, Democrats need to convince voters to side with them this year, and that's easier said than done. I spoke with State Democratic Chairman Jay Jacobs about his party's strategy at the polls. Democratic State Chairman Jay Jacobs, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Anytime. So it's a few weeks out from the election. Obviously, anything can happen, and New York is a very diverse state politically. I'm wondering, from your perspective, just generally, what message are Democrats trying to send undecided voters this year at the polls to earn their vote?
Well, I think the message really is that we need a change to go back to normalcy. I think we've had enough in this country of all of the upheaval, the upset, the attacks on our institutions, the attacks on our democracy itself. And I think we just need a return to normalcy and unity and just a calming of the temperature.
So where's the focus for Democrats in New York right now? I'm wondering if there are any areas that you're looking at specifically to pick up seats either in the state Senate or Congress, or are there even areas where you think you may be vulnerable and you're really trying to defend those seats from being taken by Republicans?
Well, you know, things get competitive in the suburbs and in upstate New York for Democrats. The cities tend to be strong Democratic areas, and we'll do well there this time as we've done in the past. But, you know, there are certain seats in upstate New York, a couple of congressional seats that we won closely the last time that we'll be working on, Brindisi, Delgado, you know, in particular, that we'll be watching as we, you know, work hard to make sure they're reelected. Max Rose in the Staten Island seat, which extends into Brooklyn, but that's going to be a competitive one as well. But then we know we've got opportunities. So Lee Zeldin out in the 1st Congressional District has got a strong challenge by Nancy Goroff, and we're looking at that. And of course, the Peter King seat in CD2 is now open. And Jackie Gordon, who's our candidate, I think stands a very good chance of being elected, putting a Democrat in that seat. And that would be a pickup. And then, of course, there are other seats upstate, New York 24, you know, with Katko, and you know, we're looking at that too, and we've got some chances.
How about the state Senate? I know that that's really competitive as well. Democrats obviously have a majority in the state Senate, and they really want to gain at least a few more seats. Is it those same types of areas like the upstate Democrats and maybe on Long Island that you're looking to pick up seats or, I guess, preserve control?
That's exactly it. You know, we've got the Rochester area. We've got some potential pickup state Senate seats that we're looking at. I know that the seat that we're looking at is Hinchy is running up in the Kingston area, and that's a promising seat. But we have to hold a few too. Harcum further down in the lower Hudson Valley, northern, you know, that area of the state. We're watching it, and we've got a full-fledged attack coming from the Republicans, and with help from Ron Lauder, giving $1.7 million, attacking our Long Island State Senate delegation. So we've got 3 seats on Long Island. Monica Martinez out in Suffolk County, Jim Gorin in the mix of Suffolk and Nassau on the North Shore, and Kevin Thomas in central Nassau, that are all under a strong attack we've got to defend.
You know, I've noticed that Republicans, particularly on Long Island, but also like in that Max Rose seat, also upstate, are really making a focus of their campaigns on the new bail reform laws that were went into effect in January. They were changed a little bit around March or April, but it's obviously still a big talking point in the campaign. What do you say to voters who may be seeing their messaging and saying that they don't agree with the bail reform laws? How do you get them on your side to vote Democrat this year?
I think if they understand what was done and don't listen to, you know, the false attacks by the Republicans, I think they'll agree with the bail reform law. It's done this way in many states across the country, federal as well. There were some problems in the initial bill that was enacted, and we fixed those. So I think the bail law as it is now is a good law. I think most citizens. I don't care whether you're a Republican or Democrat. If you looked at it for really what it was and what it does, I think you'd agree with it. It brings fairness to a system that needs it. I just think people have to look at the facts and not the fiction. Republicans have a great time selling fiction during election times. Well, I urge voters to look at the facts.
I think the other top issue for this year's elections is obviously the other big issue of the year, the coronavirus. And obviously it's tragic. More than 200,000 people have died in the United States. More than 26,000 have died here just in New York. But just from a political perspective, how do you think that plays into this year's elections? Is it a boost for Democrats because of the way that the governor handled the pandemic here, or are we going to see that same division across the country go along those lines as well?
Well, look, I'm sure there are people that agree and there are people that disagree with what the governor did in New York as much as anywhere else. But I think overwhelmingly, if you look at the polling and if you listen to people on the streets, and even, as a comparison, looking at what Donald Trump has now done with his own case of coronavirus, while we wish him well, we wish that he would have learned something from this. Nobody wanted this virus. Nobody is happy right now, but we've got to get through it. We've got to save as many lives as possible. We've got to be smart and follow the science. And that's what Democrats stand for. That's what we've been talking about. And frankly, the other side has been, about this thing will magically disappear by April. Well, April is long gone, and it has not magically disappeared. What has disappeared are an awful lot of lives. And I think the voters understand that.
All right, we're watching all these races very closely. State Senate, Congress, all of these very competitive races in New York. State Democratic Chairman Jay Jacobs, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
It was about 7 months ago that the state first closed down restaurants, except for takeout and delivery. And a lot of the state's restaurants just weren't equipped to stay open without some form of in-person dining. Fast forward to this month, and there are still heavy restrictions on restaurants and bars. And the clock is ticking on how much longer they can stay open. I spoke about the status of restaurants in New York with Melissa Fleischute from the New York State Restaurant Association and Scott Wexler from the Empire State Restaurant and Tavern Association. Melissa Fleischute from the Restaurant Association and Scott Wexler from the Restaurant and Tavern Association, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
So Melissa, I want to turn to you first. Obviously, we still have a lot of restrictions on restaurants, especially in New York City. There's limits on how many people can be at a table in some cases, limits on capacity. And I think that we all understand that that's for people's safety. It's probably the right thing to do. But from a purely financial standpoint, how long can restaurants go on like this without, I guess, closing permanently?
Not much longer would be the answer I would give. We've really been pressing hard for some more stimulus money, some more relief from the federal government, really anything, PPP money, grant money, a dedicated restaurant fund, more EIDL money, anything really at this point. We know that our congressional leaders have done a really good job pushing for New York and our needs as a restaurant industry in particular. But without additional dollars, it's going to be very difficult to continue at 25% capacity or 50% capacity going forward.
I was curious, just talking about how restaurants are right now. Obviously, a lot have gone from a purely sit-down model to some have now done takeout and delivery when they've never done it before. And I think last time you were on the show, we talked about this a little bit. I'm just curious, how has that balanced things out? Have restaurants been able to make up the difference by doing that? I'm assuming not by your face, but tell me what's been going on.
Yeah, so they're not making up the difference at this point, but I think hopefully most of them have figured out delivery and takeout. If they haven't, I would strongly encourage them to do so as soon as possible because it's just going to be an important part of the business going forward. And I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing is, they're just not back to their pre-COVID sales levels, even at 50% with outdoor dining, with takeout and delivery, with everything firing on all cylinders. They're still below last year's numbers on sales. And it depends a lot on the type of restaurant as to how much below you are.
Scott, I want to turn to you. The other side of the coin for this is compliance. The governor has said that some establishments have had a real problem with compliance, especially in New York City. He's formed a task force to shut down some restaurants and bars that just haven't been following the rules. Right here in Albany, we had one that supposedly had 70 people inside without masks and no social distancing. And I'm just wondering, it's been months since the pandemic started. How do we get people to understand that they have to follow the rules, not only just to keep their restaurants and bars open, but to keep the public safe, I guess?
Well, let's be clear, Dan. I think the governor and the state liquor authority have acknowledged it. Overwhelmingly, the hospitality industry, our employees and our customers have been compliant with the rules and regulations that have been imposed. When the governor releases now daily statistics of compliance, typically it's less than 1% of the establishments that have been visited by the task force or the state police or local police are found not to be in compliance. So the fact that 99% on a typical day are compliant, I'm actually quite proud of the entire community for how they're doing. What I can't figure out is why that 1% still doesn't get the message. But that 1% is not just in the restaurant and tavern industry. A lot of it are our customers. I'm sure you're aware of the incident that happened out in West Seneca, New York, recently, where a patron in an establishment, an 80-year-old man, who saw another patron, another older gentleman wearing without a mask, approached him, apparently reasonably politely, asked him to put the mask back on. That guy was pushed down, hit his head on the ground, and passed away recently. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a small percentage of the state's citizenry that still doesn't get it. When they're in our bars and restaurants, we're going to ask them to comply. And when they're in other establishments, those establishments have the same challenges that we do.
So just taking both sides of the coin of enforcement and compliance and then the finances that I asked you about, Melissa. I'll go to you first. What more could the state be doing to help restaurants right now? We talked about the federal government a little bit with the stimulus. Is there anything that the state could be doing to help restaurants get through this?
Well, I think there's still a lot of uncertainty as to how long they're going to be at 50%. We have restaurants across the state. So there's restaurants in the North Country where the infection rate has been extremely low, who are kind of wondering, well, what about us? Could we go to maybe 75% capacity up here and maybe we would be okay? And then, you deal with different issues like rent in New York City. Right. Although the eviction and moratorium has been great, long term, they're never going to be able to get back those lost sales to get those dollars to pay their landlords. And we understand the landlords are between a rock and a hard place too. They have mortgages that they have to pay back to the banks. So there really needs to be, and I'm not quite sure if it needs to be a state solution or a federal solution, but a long-term solution to the rent issue would be very helpful. And then again, I go back to more federal dollars. Congress has really given us an 8-week solution to what looks like it's going to be a year-long problem.
Scott, last word to you. Obviously, the weather is getting colder. Restaurants and bars could, in the summer and in the spring and now in the fall a little bit, have people outside. Well, not in the spring. But now they're going to have to put people inside or come up with other solutions. What's the alternative here? Can restaurants get through this without being able to put people outside?
Well, the fact of the matter is, as Melissa said earlier, it's going to be a real struggle for this industry. The state could extend the cocktails to go law. That's been very helpful. It's been a small help, but every little piece helps.
I like that law.
The other things that Melissa mentioned. But what's really key is the work that Melissa and the National Restaurant Association have been doing on the Federal Restaurants Act, because there's no way that this industry or any industry can survive a year with 25 to 50% of their sales. The feds bailed out the airline industry, the cruise industry, and they're talking about it again. They have to help the small independent restaurant industry. And if they provide that help, then the state will be able to provide the guidance and the oversight to allow us to come back and recover in a proper way.
All right, well, it's something that we are watching very closely here. Scott Wexler from the Restaurant and Tavern Association and Melissa Fleischute from the State Restaurant Association. Thank you both so much for being here. So we told you earlier about some of the closer elections in New York, and there's one that everyone in New York politics has their eyes on this year. It's the 46th State Senate District, which spans 5 counties in the Capital Region, Hudson Valley, and Mohawk Valley. It's a toss-up every year, and this year is no different. But the Democrat in the race has something big on her side, and that's name recognition. Michelle Hinchey is the daughter of the late New York Congressman Maurice Hinchey. We spoke about her campaign for state Senate and what she wants to do if she's elected. Michelle Hinchey, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Excited to join you.
Yeah, so you're running for state senate in this really, really competitive district. It's the 46th Senate District. It was created just in the last redistricting cycle, and it was drawn specifically, some say, for George Amador, who is the guy who holds it now. He's retiring, but it was drawn for Republicans. You're a Democrat. What are you doing to reach voters in this district that are geared towards Republicans? How are you sharing your message with them?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Our district spans 5 counties from the Hudson Valley to the Mohawk region. But really for us, we were really fortunate that we launched our campaign with a listening tour. Because for me, it was really important to not just reach people and meet people across all 5 counties that maybe I hadn't met before, or areas I hadn't been to, but to really understand the issues that people are facing. What state government is doing well, what it's not doing well, what we need to do more of. And, one thing that we see, regardless of where you live, we all kind of want the same things, right? We want to be able to put food on the table, have access to a decent, local, meaningful job, and have your kids get a decent education regardless of where you live. These are issues that shouldn't be partisan, and so for us, it's just making sure that we're connecting and talking to as many people as we can to hear how we can help them.
So just jumping off of that, if you are elected, what's at the top of your list when you get into office? What is your priority? What are those big issues that you really want to make some change with?
Yeah, not one that's all that exciting, but broadband service.
Oh, it's a huge issue.
It's a huge issue. The fact that people don't have reliable access to the internet in 2020, to me, is a travesty.
Yeah.
It was an issue before COVID and has clearly been elevated and exacerbated because of it. That's something that we desperately need to do, and it's really an upstate issue. It's something that we just haven't paid enough attention to. Also, economic development and jobs. We've got to make sure that we are bringing meaningful work into our communities so that people can stay here, when they grow up and they're looking for work and they can stay. And personally, I think we could be leading the way in green jobs. There's so much potential there. We could really be a leader in that.
Speaking of green, let's talk about some big issues in the legislature next year if you are elected. Speaking of green, I want to start with marijuana. Obviously, we've been talking about it for the last couple of years here in New York, and the 46th district, I think, is an important part of that conversation because you are so close to Massachusetts that people are driving to Massachusetts, buying the drug, coming back, Massachusetts getting the tax money. So do you think the drug should be legalized in New York, and where do you think the tax money should go to if it is legalized?
I think it should absolutely be legalized. It's something that we talk a lot about, especially because we are in a budget shortfall, right? We can't run on an austerity budget. $300 million is not enough to cover that, but it's a good start. And we're a little bit behind the times. And also what it could do for our agriculture community, specifically in the 46th district, but across the state, and especially for the environment. I mean, if we could use industrialized hemp and possibly remove plastics through what that creates, that's really exciting. That's another point that we could lead in for upstate. And so it's definitely something we're a proponent of, and I think a lot of those taxes should come back to the communities, both to communities that have been inherently disenfranchised because of criminalization, but also to the communities that are creating it, right, and selling it. Our upstate communities need help too.
What about bail reform? This is an issue that Republicans are making a huge deal out of this year. I know that your opponent is a retired state trooper. He wants to see the bail reform laws rolled back or repealed, major changes. Just for our audience, the bail reform laws took away cash bail for a lot of low-level and nonviolent charges. What's your position on that? Because I know that's going to be a huge issue this year.
It is, and quite frankly, we've met both with law enforcement and community activists as far as last year before the bail reforms were put in place, which happened in January, as well as after, and everyone agrees that the system that we had to change. It wasn't working for anyone, and we do need an equitable criminal justice system that also keeps people safe. And removing cash bail, if you committed a crime and if you had the money to get out, it doesn't mean that it was better than the person who doesn't have the money to get out, right? I mean, so those are things that we desperately had to change. The fact of the matter is we're monitoring it, and we continue to talk to the stakeholders and the people that are living and dealing with this every day. If there are changes and future reforms that need to be made, the only way we're going to do that is by having more upstate voices in the room and at the table to talk about it. But I do think it's a moment where we're seeing how they're playing out and making sure that we're just talking to the right people who are at the table and making sure we bring those recommendations back to the legislature.
I want to touch on something that you talked about before, because I think it is a nonpartisan issue of we all want to put food on the table. We want to be able to afford to buy a house. We all just want to be, I guess, safe and secure financially. Republicans will say Democrats want to come in and they want to raise the cost of living. And obviously, upstate, that's a huge issue. How can we make New York a more affordable place to live?
Yeah, we can't keep raising taxes on the middle class. We haven't in a while. I support the 2% property tax cap, which I think is incredibly important to making it more affordable in our communities. But it's true, the cost of living continues to be high. Something that I'm really interested in and looking forward into is how we separate education funding from our property taxes, right? That's something that continues to drive up costs, that increases year over year. We should change that. And it's a difficult conversation, but it's something that we have to do. Making sure that we're bringing more money into our government to help subsidize some of these costs is critical.
All right, well, those are all issues that are going to be on the table next year, of course. Michelle Hinchy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Just FYI, there's a Green Party candidate in that race this year as well, Bob Alft. But funny thing about that race, the seat is held right now by Republican State Senator George Amador. He's retiring. But the Republican running to replace him is named Rich Amador, almost the exact same last name. And he's even using the same style campaign graphics and logos. We've reached out to his campaign for an interview, but until then, thanks for watching this week's New York Now. Have a great week and be well.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET.
And by the Dominic Ferrioli Foundation.